welcome to another episode of Conversations with Alison Jaye, The Journey to Here. I'm your host, Alison Jaye. Today we welcome our guest, Stevon Lewis. Stevon is a licensed marriage and family therapist practicing in the Los Angeles area. He works with individuals suffering from imposter syndrome, assisting his clients with understanding the scope of their impostorism, its origin, and reducing negative symptoms and behaviors that develop over time as a result of imposter syndrome. His goal as a therapist is to assist with developing solutions, gaining insight, and modifying behavior to bring about more happiness, satisfaction, and a sense of understanding into the life of his clients. He works with clients to uncover the underlying influences of their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors to create meaningful, positive, and lasting change in their lives. Imposter syndrome is not something I had really heard of until I heard you speaking. So you know what it's like. You just think, what is this thing? you start to look into it, and as I looked into it, I was finding all kinds of things. I was just like, oh, okay. So hence me reaching out and really wanting to speak to you about imposter syndrome, which is something that a lot of people, I think, may suffer from, but don't know.
Right.
Because when you don't know what you don't know, you don't know, right? So, Stevon Lewis.
Yes.
I have your bio and I have everything, but I think you introduce yourself. You tell us who you are and what you do. And how you got to be doing what you do, because I always find that the journey to where we are today is very important. So, Stevon Lewis, welcome. Thank you for joining me here on Conversations with Alison Jaye, The Journey to Here.
Thank you for having me. So I am Stevon Lewis. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm based out of California, Southern California. The South Bay area, if people are familiar with that. So my practice was in Torrance. That's where my office used to be before COVID hit. Now I'm doing only teletherapy sessions, so everything's virtual at this moment. Not sure when we'll return back to status quo. So I've been doing therapy for a while now. I got started way back in 2007, working with individuals involved in the juvenile justice system. So doing kind of that family reunification stuff, as they were coming back from camp or placement or juvenile hall, and trying to get the families to kind of find ways to protect those kids from being removed from the home again. And I did that for a while and kind of moved my way up, and then moved on to Woodbury University, a small private college here in Burbank, California. And there I was the director of counseling services. So I was responsible for the oversight of all the psychotherapy for the students there. So I supervised 2 licensed clinicians and 2 unlicensed clinicians. And we kind of just made sure that the students were kind of having their mental health needs met. I've always had my private practice on the side, and I jumped in full time in August 2019. And in my private practice, I specialize in working with individuals struggling with imposter syndrome. Kind of across the board, I have a ton of clients. A lot of them are, Black, Indigenous people of color, and a lot of them are self-employed, so entrepreneurs. And so I kind of work with them to make sure that they feel connected to their successes. So I guess like you were mentioning, imposter syndrome is kind of more of a newer term that got kind of put on the map, I guess, more recently. But it's been around for a while. It was coined by a woman named Dr. Pauline Clance, and she's out of the University of Georgia. And she coined the term way back in 1978. And so in doing that, she was working with women in graduate school. And she found that even though they were performing well, that they weren't really feeling connected to the success. So they always felt like they were behind or weren't really good enough to belong in grad school. And so she named it, or she labeled the term imposter phenomenon, but people kind of know it more as imposter syndrome. And so I stumbled into it, and kind of working in my practice, I kind of took an analysis, a look at the clients that I really enjoyed, and come to find out they had all these kind of things in common. right? And these things kind of led me to say, well, what's going on here? Because these are people who in life, I look at them and I'm saying they are killing it. Like they are making it happen. I'm like, you're winning at life. And for whatever reason, they feel like a fraud. They aren't able to connect to their success. They feel as though at some point they're going to be found out to not really possess the skills and abilities that everyone else can kind of clearly see. And so as I kind of delved into it more, that's how I kind of stumbled in and connected to imposter syndrome and working with the individuals struggling with it.
That's very, very interesting, because there's some of the things that you mentioned that were in thoughts and questions that I had that I wanted to put to you. So, because like I was saying, because when I heard you speak and I started like imposter syndrome, I'm like, okay, so like what is it? Just like, what is it? Because we know what the word imposter means.
Right.
And then syndrome. So, because I'm thinking, because you know, when we hear the word imposter, we think of like spy movies and things like that. Right? We don't really apply the word imposter on a personal level, that it could even remotely have any application to any area of my life.
Because I'm a real person, right? I know who I am. I know that I'm Stevon Lewis and I'm okay. You know, you're Alison Jaye and you're fine. But it's more of like feeling as a fraud in the sense that the area you're kind of wanting to delve into, or that you're participating in, and that could be career-wise, it could be in your relationship, and you just don't feel as though that your success or the success you're getting is really because of you. And that's where the imposter comes in, right? That's where that term starts to kind of manifest itself, is that I feel like a fake in the idea or in the sense that don't belong in this space that I'm currently in, right? And so it's getting them to understand that that's not actually the case, that in reality, if you're in this room, you belong in this room. And you know, kind of in working with them, you find all sorts of reasons why people, I guess, are able to kind of convince themselves that they don't belong in these spaces, even though they do. Like, again, we look at them and tangibly we say, you are crushing life, you're killing it, you're winning. And for them, they live in this fear that they're going to be found out to be a phony, right? That they aren't really who people think they are.
And could that be, like, for example, in some cases, somebody that has worked their way up and they've got this amazing idea and they put these initiatives and plans in place and then they get promoted, but then when they think like, oh my God, but I don't actually have any like real formal qualifications. I'm up against people that have bachelors and masters and PhDs, and so I remember I used to think to myself, I'm in a room with people that, and they're talking about, yeah, I've got 2 degrees, I've got 3 degrees, and I'm like,
look at that shining away. Yeah. Let me look at you. Don't look my way, because I don't have any of that stuff.
Exactly. And I'm thinking to myself, how did I get into this room?
There you go. There's that questioning.
How? Because it wasn't the, do I belong in the room? The first question, because before I even came to the feeling of belonging, do I belong, to ask that question, is how did I get into this room? Right.
That somehow you snuck in, or somebody allowed you to be in, and you were not supposed to have access to that room. And you're like, what am I doing in here? Everyone else is way better than I am. Right. And that's part of the lies that we tell ourselves. And you kind of find out, like, when you talk to someone who struggles with imposter syndrome, or, you know, kind of is battling it, you find like all these commonalities. At least I did kind of in my work. Right. And so what I found is that, you know, it starts kind of way back in childhood sometimes, often. Is that you'll find that people had parents who were super critical of them, right, and didn't really kind of share information about when they were doing well, but always kind of pointing out when they were, you know, not meeting the mark. So, you know, sit up straight, you know, don't walk like that, you know, chew your food. It starts off little stuff like that, but then it's like, you know, it grows into other areas. And so what the message is that we're getting is that for whatever reason, we don't do things correctly, right? Because our parents are always kind of suggesting or telling or sharing with us that we're messing up, so I must not know how to do things in an appropriate way. You also find that, you know, their parents, while they were often super critical, is that they often didn't, you know, or I guess reserved praise for when you had some major accomplishment. So like you had to graduate high school or college or get married or some, you know, once in a lifetime type of event in order to say good job. And so then the rest of the time you're kind of questioning yourself, saying like, well, am I really doing anything that matters? because, you know, I brought home a 3.5 and all I got was that was what you were supposed to do. Right. And it's not like great job or that's amazing or fantastic.
You
It's like,
keep
well, you
going.
know, why? Exactly. Right. And so you start again, the message we're receiving is that we aren't doing well enough. Right. So
And
that
nothing
when you
is
start,
good enough.
exactly, not doing good enough. And so that when you get into these spaces, it's almost a thing of, well, I know from history that one, I don't have what it takes, and two, that I, you know, don't really do that exceedingly well in most things because I don't get a lot of praise. What am I doing here?
Right. Yeah. And now that you say that, I fully identified with yes, because I do recall it when you said that. So maybe somehow someone snuck me in. What came into my head was, you know, when a parent sneaks their child into work and they bring them into the meeting and like, shh, sit,
Yep.
don't say anything, don't, just make sure nobody notices you're in here.
Yep.
It was that kind of thing. It's like, if I say nothing, just keep my head down, people may not realize I'm here in this room.
And I can continue to survive and or remain in the room and not really get kicked out, right?
Yes.
Which is a
Wow.
tough thing because, like, what if you start to shine or do well? Then the fear increases because it's like, well, now I have more opportunity because I'm being more visible to get found out to be a phony and not belong.
Yeah, and I found that, and I'm not saying this to be US bashing at all, but I found like when moving here, more emphasis was put on degrees than back in the UK. So it was even more so like, because I remember I got a promotion, so they were recruiting to backfill the position, and the person that was my boss, he was looking through all these resumes and so on and so forth. And I remember he said, yeah, and look at this one. She doesn't even have a degree. And I'm thinking to myself, okay. And then he says, yeah, because you got a degree, right? And I was thinking, do I lie? Do I? What do I say in this? Because the way he was so critical of the fact that she didn't have a degree. And then when I looked at because when you look at the job she was going to be doing, and I'm not knocking having degrees, I'm not knocking education or anything,
Right.
but the reality was to do that, bearing in mind, the reason I was in that job is because he and I worked together at another company. He just loved how I worked, loved how I got things done. And I remember he said to me, should I ever leave here, whether it be to start my own thing or to move on to a competitor, I'm going to take you with me. And I didn't work with him at the time. We just worked in the same office, but he just saw how I did stuff. Lo and behold, fast forward a few years, that happened. Called me up out of the blue, like, sure, yeah, why not? So I've been working with him now in this position for years. Got a promotion. So, and I'm thinking to myself, so the fact that I was able to do this job so well that you wanted me to move with you, and I got a promotion and all the rest of it, just actually stands to reason that a person doesn't need to have a degree to be able to do this particular job. As long as they have the ability and the experience, that's really all that to me that's counted. So when he said that, I really shrunk back and I thought, well, if you need a promotion to do, if you need a degree to do the job I've just been promoted from, what's it going to be like in this promotion? Oh my God, do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm hyperventilating, like, oh my God, maybe I don't, panic. Anxiety.
Immediately, because it's like, oh shit, I'm going to be found out and I'm going to be screwed. They're going to realize I don't have a degree and they've promoted me and I'm done. It's over. 100%. I mean, and it's funny that you mentioned that, like, you know, part of you know, not wanting to bash American culture, but it's kind of like in that corporate culture, right? And so, like, you know, people, especially when you're, you know, Black or a person of color, is that, you know, in majority white spaces, which corporate America or, you know, kind of often is, or big business, is that, you know, the standards that are set are not really kind of normed or, you know, for us, they are more kind of based off of whiteness or you know, Westernness. And so then there's this idea of we don't kind of line up with that culturally, then we're doing something wrong or we're kind of off base. And so there again is that disconnect that, hey, I'm looking around and the things that they value aren't kind of the things that I hold important. And so I'm not lining up. I also don't fit in. So when you're talking about your experience, like it's, light bulbs going off in my head, like absolutely, it makes sense then that, you aren't kind of fitting in these areas, not knowing the race of the individual or whatnot, but like there's this separation of, you need to have these things in order to be doing things appropriately. And it's just that kind of set of standards that don't always necessarily apply for people who are gifted and talented in other ways. And maybe it's not academically, but can still get the job done.
Right. Yeah, and that was so, and this all happened before I heard you speak. So things started to, I'm just like, okay, that is, and I'm thinking, because I would never have thought, I'm thinking, me, never. Imposters, absolutely not.
Not at all. I absolutely belong in doing what I'm doing.
No, and I just thought, you actually, yeah, that has been the thing. And again, that has been the thing, not just here in the US. When I was in the UK working in certain environments, yes, I felt like, and I remember one place I was working and they were all so well-to-do, and they were, I'm told they were also posh, and I just thought, and then in comes this black woman.
Yep.
Right? Just, and I'm one of those, anybody that knows me, they're always like, oh my God, Alison, you're the only person that can say that and get away with it. I'm that kind of person, right? So you've got all these posh people, and I'm the only black person in the entire company.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so rightfully so.
And then I come in, and then after a while, I'm just like, how did I get in here? How? Just how? How did they pick me?
Right.
Over everybody else? And I just like, okay, you just gotta square your shoulders, look the world in the face, and you just gotta do it. But in the back of your mind, you're still questioning how.
Right. Because you had confidence before you got into the room, and then like whatever happened when you pass through the threshold, it starts to disappear. The interesting thing is that for you, when you were talking about, your experience and how you said, immediately it turned into anxiety, right? And that's an important kind of distinction, is that, while imposter syndrome isn't in the, DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, kind of how therapists, I guess, kind of, diagnose and treat mental illness. But anxiety is, right? And that's one of the kind of offshoots of it, is that here's this response of where now I'm living in kind of constant fear, right? Or worry that's excessive about being found out to be, not belong or be a fraud. And at some point I'm going to get exposed, and it's living in that fear, right? So you start to engage in all these behaviors to try to prevent yourself from being found to not be capable, when in actuality, this guy, kind of pegged you a long time ago to say, hey, you have what it takes. Whenever I leave, like, I want to make sure I stay connected to you because you do really good work. But you forget all of that stuff.
Yes. Yes, that is very true, and I'm glad that you mentioned anxiety and things like, because that's what one of the questions I wanted to ask you. If you could quantify it, what does imposter syndrome feel like?
It feels like I would say kind of a consistent fear, a consistent worry that at some point in the future, that it's almost impending, you're going to be found out to be a phony. And that you kind of disappointed, or you tricked all these people into believing you had skills and abilities that you didn't have, and that you're going to be embarrassed after you're exposed for not really being as such. And so people live with that on a consistent basis as they kind of travel through and embark in life, right? And so, it shows up in different spaces that we kind of venture into, so some of it could be at work, some of it could be in our relationships. And it's all based off of this narrative that we've kind of adopted about ourselves and who we are and what our abilities are. So like in a relationship, for example, you might tell yourself, I don't know what a successful relationship looks like because I didn't have a model for it. So I don't really know what I'm doing. Even if you've been with your partner for, 6 years and it's been good, and there haven't been like, any real problems that have, I guess any deal breaker problems where you're like, hey, I'm done. I hate you guys. Like, we're not going to be together. You're still telling yourself that I don't know what I'm doing. So at some point I'm going to probably mess this up. And so then there's this fear of like, maybe I shouldn't commit further, or maybe I shouldn't move forward with this person because it's not fair to them, because they're going to find out I'm not really a good fit, right? And so then as a result of that thinking, then your behavior starts to, maybe self-sabotage, or you do things that aren't really appropriate. Go for it. I see your point. I did something.
I'm so glad you're saying that, because as well as doing the podcast, I blog, and I actually started writing one yesterday. And I think, I can't remember, I sort of titled it something like "Live Again, Love Again, Don't Shut the Door." But one of the things that I have put in there, it's when people that have gone through certain things in relationships, and how I wrote it was like, there's a proverb that says, guard your heart because from it flows your life. But some people, they don't guard it. They barricade that bad boy in, right? And then they put it in a fortified castle on top of some mountains somewhere. Yep. And then they get into relationships with, and then they start to do and behave in a way that then self-sabotages the relationship. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yep.
To justify, to say, you see, it was because, and it's like, actually, no, you already had this thing in your mind that it was kind of going to fail, because maybe you felt you weren't good enough because of how the last relationship ended, or you felt you weren't good enough because the last relationship ended, or for whatever reason. So that was something I wrote. In fact, it wasn't even last night, it was in the early hours of this morning. So the fact that you have mentioned that, I feel like, okay, I'm actually on the right track with this blog and what I'm doing within that particular subject. But it's so true, because I have seen that. And the funny thing is, I'm not saying I haven't seen it in women, but I've seen that more in men than I have in women, because they've obviously looked at it like because that emotion, that whereas women, most women we can handle and deal with our emotions easier, and then kind of move forward and love again, as opposed to how men can. So does that also fall under the whole imposter syndrome umbrella?
For sure. I think that, like, what you're kind of hitting on is the idea of like vulnerability for men, right? And that men are typically socialized to kind of be able to express a wide range of emotions, or talk about problems in a way that, young girls or women are. And so then if I don't have the capacity or ability to talk about the concerns I have about myself, and, where I might think that I'm not kind of meeting the mark in terms of being a good partner, then instead of talking about that stuff, I internalize it, right? And so then it just shows up, or it comes out behaviorally, and it's not, coming out verbally, which would probably be a better approach. And so then, maybe relationship ends, but there's something that happens, or where men, and I think you're kind of hitting on, is that they have experiences of when things go bad, and they feel pain, they feel sadness, all the same emotions. Like, it's not like men don't feel this stuff, just can't be expressed the same way, right? And so, like you said, that walling off or barricading, of your heart, because, I've been hurt, I hate the way that feels, I'm not going to ever allow that to happen again.
Yeah, and men and women have both been on the receiving end of somebody that's been in that, and that's hard. Like, especially if you know that that person has it within them to be a whole person in this relationship, but you can see that inner, because they're just like, especially because when it comes to the blowing the hot and cold, because they come forward and they start to remember that, like, oh, no. What we're not going to do is go back there.
Yep, 100%.
Wow, that's interesting. I'm glad you touched on that, just to show that imposter syndrome can just show up in every area of your life, not just in the corporate world, but in your relationships. So
for sure,
that's really important. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, because again, thinking back, and it's like, I was thinking, one of the questions was, why do people suffer or experience imposter syndrome? And when I look at it, like, the same person, because I'm talking about myself here, because the same person can experience imposter syndrome in one environment
Mm-hmm.
and then be so confident in another environment. Like, prime example, I remember I went for this job. I knew I couldn't do this job. I knew, listen, when
You're
Stevon,
like, I'm not joking. You
I'm
at
not
the
even kidding.
beginning, I was aware I cannot do
I
this.
knew I couldn't do this job. However, I thought to myself, can't be that hard. I can learn it.
Mm-hmm.
I can absolutely learn this job. And I went into that interview. I aced the interview. I got the job.
Yeah.
I got the job. And it's actually happened more than once, where there was another time they asked me if there's a particular skill I could do. I said, no, I can't do it.
You were honest with them.
Yeah.
You were honest with them, like, yeah, I don't have that. I don't have that at all.
I went through an employment agency. They asked me if I could do this skill. I said no.
Mm-hmm.
I got called for an interview. In the interview, they asked me. I said no. I got called back for a second interview. They asked me. I said no.
Yeah.
Not even 10 minutes later, I'm getting a phone call. They're offering me the job. So I'm like, okay, I want and this was in England. I'm like, I want £1,000 more than they're offering. They gave me.
Oh, nice.
They gave me. And I'm thinking, well, I can't do. I'm thinking, this makes no sense to me.
Right.
I went in there and I did the job. I learned. And as with the other one I was mentioning, it was both back in London. I learned the job and so on. But the fact of me, in those instances, I actually wasn't afraid of being found out. Because one of them, I didn't tell them that I didn't know or anything. I just went in there, talked a good game, got the job, bam, that was it. And while I was in there, to be honest, I don't feel like I suffered from imposter syndrome. Where I told them no, I can't do that. And they still gave it to me. I think I was just honest with them up front and I learned it. But then there's been other positions that I'm actually more than capable and qualified to do. And that's where it comes in. Why is that?
Right. So you hit on a few different things. First, you've talked about how it's not kind of universal, right? It's not across the board that we feel like an imposter in every facet or aspect of our lives, which is true, right? That with imposter syndromes, oftentimes it shows up in a very specific instance or situation. For some people that could be career, other people it could be relationship, others, it might be in, sports or whatever, or doing, something creative or what have you. It's speaking in front of people, it's anything. And so, in those spaces, we tell ourselves we don't have what it takes. So for you, like you're saying in your experience, though, is that interestingly, in some situations, you've gone into jobs and you felt very, very confident. And that's when you had no skill or you told yourself you didn't have the skills, right? So let's distinguish that, because whether or not you really had them, it sounds like you had the skills, but somehow you convinced yourself of that. And then in other areas where you feel like, hey, I know what I'm doing, you feel maybe less confident. And I think part of that is about that narrative, right? And so in situations where you told yourself, hey, I absolutely don't know what I'm doing, if you fail or perceived to be a fail in that situation, it's okay, because why was there was no real expectation that you would be able to do it effectively or successfully, because you already convinced yourself before you even started, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So it doesn't matter if I get in here and it doesn't work out. I knew at the outset that I had no idea and no business being in here anyway. Let me just see if I can fake it, right? And then in other situations where you're like, hey, I actually do know what I'm doing, we tell ourselves, well, now there's this expectation, right? There's this expectation for me to live up here or perform up here. And that what if I am not perfect in doing so? Then people are going to think I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to be embarrassed because I thought I knew what I was doing, and come to find out I didn't. And we talk ourselves out of it, even though we've got the skill set and abilities. And what I try to teach my clients to get them to recognize is that you're telling yourself this, but you're also discrediting or dismissing all the information from the outside world that says they trust and believe you have what it takes, right? That you have the abilities and the skills to be able to do what it is that you're doing. Otherwise, they wouldn't have chosen you to do it. Unless you're saying you're that great of an actor, which possible. And then if that's the case, then why not have some faith that you'll continue to fake it and, won't be found out. You'll continue to be able to trick people and act as though you know what you're doing.
That's interesting, because in one of them, I think the reason I told myself that I couldn't do it is because it's not something I'd ever done before. I'd never even, the industry, I'd never even heard of it before and what they did. And it's funny, it was like afterwards, because the thing is, there's so many companies and businesses and industries that we actually use very regularly and have no idea. And it was one of those companies that, it's one of those companies where you had to do the forecast and the projections for flights to make sure there's enough food and meals and snacks and drinks and beverages and all that on the flights. And it's not something I mean, by the time I got that job, I've been flying for years. Never stopped to think that there's somebody behind the scenes that actually has to do a lot of numbers and calculating and connecting with vendors and chefs and all kinds of things. So I was actually doing that job. I'd never even heard of it. The money was good. When I saw the ad, I was like, okay. So it's because I'd never heard of it before. And I just thought, well, I've never heard of this kind of thing. I've never done this kind of thing. So, hey, can't do it. So I think, so to your point, it was more of that. I told myself I couldn't do it because it's not something I'd ever heard of. And I went in there and I did the job. It was actually a bit boring. It was actually very boring. So, oh my God, this really is not funny. So that's actually funny now, because speaking to you, I completely even forgot about that job. But I was just thinking about imposter syndrome and the fact that I think, well, speaking about people, they feel that more when it is actually about something they actually can do.
Right. So like, I mean, there's a part of us of where we're embarking upon something new, and it's appropriate for us to have a little bit of, angst or anxiety about it, or worry or concern, because it's something we haven't done before, right? So we're trying it out new and we aren't sure how it's going to go. I think the distinction with imposter syndrome is that after being in that space for a while, we expect that feeling now goes away, right? Like if I've ridden my bike now, 30 times and, I've not fallen, I've been okay, I can safely say, hey, I know how to ride a bike. Give me a bike, I should be able to get on it, right? But if every time I got on a bike, I don't know how this is going to go, it's kind of like, well, why are we questioning it still? Because you've been doing it and you've been successful at it, right? And so I think that's the thing about imposter syndrome, is that feeling of mastery or the confidence never really gets in, even though you have exhibited evidence of being able to get the job done. And like I said, I think it's more attached to the fact of we are more concerned or worried about the expectations that other people may be putting on us and our ability to kind of meet those. Yep.
Right.
Yep. So
yeah. Okay. So, and it's interesting you actually use the bike, because before you started to use the bike, I was thinking about driving a car. When you first start learning, you're going to be a bit anxious and that, because you don't know what you're doing, and you're behind the wheel of something that could kill people, yourself included, right? And then as you get more, because now, and at the risk of sounding like the character from Rain Man, I'm a very good driver. I get in the car and I don't think about it, and I'm that person that I will go to different places. Like when I first moved over here, and my friends are like, "Oh my God, you drive in America? It's on the other side of the road." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's a car, it's a road. It's like, you just figure it out, don't you?"
Exactly.
So you don't. So there's certain things that you no longer think about and question the more you do it. But when it comes to other areas of your life, the more you do it, the more you're getting anxious and questioning yourself and your ability, which is so bizarre.
Yeah, right. Because I mean, like the way you said is like, I know I can do this thing in this one area. Why wouldn't I be successful in this other area, right? Like it might be a little different, but I should still be able to do it. Just like you said, I mean, that's a great analogy, is the car, of like, in the UK, other side of the road, different, but you know how to drive a car. Like, so why couldn't, it might feel a little different when you're over here, but you still know the mechanics and the fundamentals of being able to drive a car. It's the same thing, I kind of use the analogy of like being able to swim. If you can swim in a pool, then you can swim in the ocean, right? Like it might be a little bit difficult. You got to gauge for waves and all that sort of stuff. But swimming it's still going to be the same, right? Like you should be able to do that part. If you know how to swim in a pool, you should be able to do it in the ocean as well, right? And so like we talk ourselves out of it in situations where we say now the stakes are higher, or there are more eyes on me, and it's like, well, you're discrediting now that you have ability or skill set to do what you've been kind of chosen or given opportunity or space to do, and on top of that, you're now dismissing all the other people who are essentially saying that they don't know what they're talking about because they've also agreed that you have these skills and abilities as well. And it's like, well, who's wrong here, right? Like everybody was wrong. Like
Oh my
you didn't know what you were doing and you're an imposter. And also all the people who think they know what it looks like for somebody that has the skill set and abilities, they don't know what they're talking about either.
That is very, very profound, because you don't think about that, because you think about, because as you were saying that, what I was thinking is, because we mentioned about the external pressure, but the reality is it really an external pressure, or has our inner dialogue convinced us of this external pressure that really is not existing, because these people are the ones that said, yeah, we believe you can do this.
Yeah, they signed off too. I mean, the way I label it is the inner bully, right? That like, just like a real bully, that beats you up or says mean stuff to you, we all have an inner bully, right? And it's that inner voice that tells us or feeds on our insecurities, or, tells us that in spaces when we aren't doing things well, it comes in and says, see, look at that, you don't know what you're doing. There's those fears where we don't feel like we're really talented. It shows up to make us feel terrible, right? And so it's more about being aware of your inability in the negative narrative that it's kind of telling you. And, it says this stuff without really providing a ton of evidence. We know the inner bully's a liar. And so it'll say stuff that sounds real, but we've got to check that stuff out. We've got to say, well, where's the evidence to support that I'm not really good at doing what you're saying, what I'm getting involved in? Is it that people have told me that? Have I been rejected from this a ton of times? Like, what am I using, or what are you using inner bully, to kind of tell me or convince me that I don't know what I'm doing? And I think that's the stuff that we kind of ignore or dismiss and don't pay attention to or aren't aware of often.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. The inner bully. Wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. It's a real thing. I mean, like me as a therapist, my inner bully might say, Stevon, you're not really that good as a therapist. You suck. Right. And I can believe that because like exactly. I can believe that, right? I'm like, oh, you aren't helping people. And it's like, well, okay, let me kind of take some evidence and see what you give me, right? Like, where's the evidence to support that claim? And if I say it, I'm like, well, people are asking me to speak about stuff that I do in therapy. I have clients and full caseload, and people are paying me and they keep coming back. So, while they may not have said directly, Stevon, you're awesome and amazing, they've also kind of shown that they value what it is that I do, right? And so I can't really, listen to the inner bully and say and believe it that I really suck, because I guess I'm saying then if I truly suck, then why would I even have a practice? Why am I surviving? Why have I not already been run out of the profession?
That's true. And thinking about it, if we actually really all listened to the inner bully, I think the basket case is sucking our thumb underneath a sheet somewhere.
Yep.
Because it's true, because when you think about it, and you're going into a situation and you're anxious and your heart's pounding, palms sweating, literally just like, oh my God, I'm sweating, stop this. And you're just paying attention to what the inner bully is telling you.
Yep.
And yeah, that has the potential to turn us all into a basket case.
Yeah, because we're accepting it and we're believing it to be true. And what we aren't doing is asking the question or challenging it and saying, well, provide me some evidence to support that what you said is accurate.
That's why a lot of us should never be left alone with our thoughts. Just should not. Just like, no. Somebody said something to me the other day, and I said, listen, I'm not trying to get into your head because I barely want to be in my own.
I love it.
Right out there. So in that case then, so how do you know if you have imposter syndrome, and what are the symptoms? Because could imposter syndrome like mirror some other symptoms which are normal healthy things, like, because it's normal to have some anxiety when you're going into something, right? It's a bit normal to be a little, like, question yourself a little bit, because that basically shows that you're not cocky.
Right.
So how would you say that it's inner syndrome, imposter syndrome, as opposed to it's just the normal levels of anxiety or uncertainty that we all feel from time to time? And what are the
Right. And so I think the way I kind of see it is that it starts to impact the way we function, right? So it starts to impact our daily functioning. So that's my kind of key indicator, if you will, as to when it's more of a problem than just that healthy level of anxiety that gets us to be effective, or a healthy level of concern, right? So when we think about emotions, they're like the categories, especially when we talk about negative emotions, is there like the healthy version, like the healthy kind of, looking at it on a spectrum, and then the unhealthy range, right? And so the healthy range is like, worry or concern. Unhealthy is anxiety, right? So that when we move over into the unhealthy realm, like we aren't really being productive still, we aren't able to kind of be our best version of ourselves, we still get things done. Whereas like when there's concern, it's like I get more focused and I pay a little bit more attention so that I don't make mistakes. Anxiety, I'm not even engaging in things because I'm so fearful that I'm going to make a mistake. So where I look for, to see if like imposter syndrome is having an issue is that, how is it showing up in your life? Are you so worried about being found out to be a fraud that you are now not kind of seeking out promotions that you might be available for, or appropriate or right for? Are you not kind of pushing yourself to try new things because you're saying you're going to suck at it and you're not going to be successful? Are you not trying to really get in relationships or stuff like that? The other side is that, like, are you also feeling maybe a bit more depressed? So we talk about the other side of anxiety and that depression, is that is your imposter syndrome causing you to feel like you're a failure, like you're kind of behind everybody else and everybody else is ahead of you, right? So that you're now saying you don't have what it takes, I'm not really that good, and you're in this negative space and not really feeling good about yourself constantly. Like that, to me, that's a huge problem. Like I don't think that we should walk around hating ourselves all day long. I think that you have some good to offer, and other people would probably say so as well. Like, are you perfect? Maybe not. And then some of the other unique ways that it shows up. Right. Some of the other unique ways that it shows up is that, like, it'll show up in behaviors that we reward, but it's coming from a bad place. So we'll think about people who are, so concerned about being found out to be a fraud. So that now that they're like working extra hours late, and people will say, "Oh, you're dedicated. Look how committed you are. This guy really loves his work." And it's like, no, I'm actually fearful that I've made a mistake, and so I've got to make sure everything is absolutely perfect, and all my ducks are in a row. But it looks like this person again. Yeah, exactly, all the time. And we're rewarding that, saying, such a hard worker, dedicated, you can count on him. And it's like, no, that's coming from a place of fear. Exactly. And so, some of those behaviors that'll get rewarded in different spaces, when in actuality, it's coming from a place that's not really positive.
So let me ask you then, this is slightly off topic. Do you think that's how workaholics are born?
I think there's some element to that too, right? I mean, workaholics, it could be a little bit of impostorism, or it could also be this, I define myself by what I'm able to produce or accomplish. And so that they are in a place of where, unless they're doing something or accomplishing something, or, then they don't have value. So if their self-worth is tied up into what, their career is, or what their identity is tied up in that, then you might see them kind of put more time in those areas than maybe we would say is appropriate or healthy, considering.
Okay. Because as you saying that with the long hours and making this all done, because in some circles that would be called a workaholic.
Right.
But the reason behind it,
yes,
is because you just feel like they're gonna find me out, so I have to make sure I'm on top of my game, like you said, all my ducks in a row all day, every day. And you have the risk of, imposter syndrome, but a workaholic.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, there are labels for it. I mean, call it the types of imposters. There's like the perfectionist, who if everything's not perfect, then it's not of worth. There's that. There we go. We've identified her. Yeah, that everything has to be perfect, otherwise it's trash. And, that comes from, again, this feeling that I don't belong, so I have to do things to a degree that's excellent, right? And you put this pressure on yourself. Other people are like, what they call the Superman or Superwoman, so that I've got to go above and beyond. And, not only does it have to be perfect, but it has to be great, right? So it's not that like I did everything correctly, like I had to do something amazing for it to really count and for it to be seen as of worth. So it's, you had to fly a rocket to the moon by yourself in order to say you're good at physics or whatever. And it's like, well, Tom, if that's the litmus, then, most everybody sucks then, because not everybody's been able to accomplish that stuff. So it's like, just these different types of individuals that kind of show up, and their impostorism kind of presents itself in a different way. I mean, there's also the people who have to kind of, the expert, right? That's what we call them, that they have to study everything in order for them to say they know anything. It's not that,
you're in the room all the time.
Exactly. That, like, you're telling me you have to have read every article on imposter syndrome for me to be able to talk about imposter syndrome. If that's the case, then nobody will ever be able to talk about it, because it's always information being produced and written about it. So, at some point you have to say, enough to be okay. But people who are experts are like, well, I've learned this, but, I'm no expert. I don't know this. And this person knows more than me. And it's like, well, I mean, if that's the thing, but I'm saying, enough to be able to do this part. That's all I'm saying. But for them, that's not okay. I've got to do all the trainings. I got to do all the workshops. I got to read all the material before I feel enough confidence. And I'm still not super confident, but now I feel like, okay, I can do it. Because again, if I'm an imposter, I have to know all the answers, because if I get asked something and I don't know it, I'm going to be exposed immediately.
Yes, because there's many times that I've been having conversations and I've said something and they've said, and I'm like, you don't have to know all the answers. Right. It's fine for you to not know all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be guessing and trying to figure it out and feel like the pressure's on you to come up with the answer. We're just talking. We're just talking. So yeah, that and I do know people like that, and I think some of what you're saying I could identify with, because in some of the things that I do, because when I was in the UK I had my own wedding and events company. Mm-hmm. And so if you're doing somebody's wedding,
yes,
the pressure on doing,
there are no opportunities for mistakes here.
Exactly. So then you hold yourself to this high, ridiculously high standard, mm-hmm. and of perfectionism, that then you see it start to go into other areas of your life. Because I got to admit, when I first started doing weddings, I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
I told myself that a lot, because I am one of these people that I get an idea,
uh-huh.
and I just go and do it. And then I'm like, what am I doing? I don't even know what I'm doing. It's like, how? Or I fall into things by accident, because the way that I even got into doing weddings was a friend was getting married in another country, and I saw that she was doing all the work. I'm like, so where's your bridesmaids? Where's your family? Mm-hmm. Where's your this? So I'm just like, I'm not having the bride doing all of this. This is ridiculous. So I stepped in and I started doing stuff. But then I'm just like, no, that needs to be like this, and this needs to be like this. Because so then I put that pressure on myself, because now it was this self-proclaimed thing, because nobody actually gave me the position.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's just because I just didn't want to see the bride doing it. But now I took on this whole thing, like, people now think, and that was at the time when that movie with Jennifer Lopez came out, The Wedding Planner.
Oh yeah.
I started calling people, and I started to get really mad, because people started calling me the wedding planner, but really I wasn't the wedding planner. I was just a friend attending the wedding. But then because that label was then being put on me, I felt this pressure to be perfect, because the reality was I didn't know what I was doing, because I wasn't a wedding planner.
But you were planning a wedding, so it's like, which one is it? Is it because you said you aren't, or is it like, and that's it. Like, people get caught up in the what, or the how versus the what, right? And it's like, it's the process versus the product. Like, because you are telling yourself you don't know what you're doing, then you discredit the fact that you're getting it done, right? And so it's like, you get caught up in the how, as opposed to the what. And it's like, what is the outcome? The outcome is that you made this wedding go off and you made it easier and she was grateful or whatever, and it worked out well, as opposed to the fact that you're so hung up on the fact I'm not a wedding planner. It's like, that doesn't matter if you're getting stuff done.
That is because it's like this. I feel like I'm in a therapy session, Stevon. This is not what it's supposed to be. Okay, this is not about me. Okay, so it is not. So now everybody's kind of getting into the inner workings of my head. Don't get in there.
Yeah. Let's find out what Alison is.
My head. That is not the place you want to be. I don't want to be in it. So okay, so that's but as you mentioned earlier about the woman that coined the phrase, and I was actually going to ask you, do you find that women suffer from imposter syndrome more? And that was really based on an article I read. But the article wasn't just saying women. It says that, and I'm going to read it. It says, why imposter syndrome hits women and women of color harder.
Yep.
And I thought, when I saw that, I was like, I was going to ask that question. Do you see it affects women more than men, or men more so than women? Because there's a lot of pressure on men. And they don't have that outlet the way that women do, where I could just call up one of my girlfriends and be like,
Right.
And it's done, gotten it off my chest, like, okay, I'm good. Whereas men don't have that outlet so much as women, because they just like shrug it off, go for a run, go to the gym, they figure something out to do. But so the fact that women still have that outlet, but yet it hits women harder.
Yeah, I think it's more about that, the way that, society is kind of set up, right? So that, when I talked earlier about like kind of corporate culture and how it's kind of normed or based off of, whiteness or Westernness, and a lot of that is male dominated. And so then you think about, the gender differences, is that, in women, when they behave in certain ways, it gets labeled negatively as opposed to positively if a man did the same thing, right? So, if she's assertive, they say aggressive, or, she might get labeled a bitch or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And it's like, well, time, because when Chad did it, it was okay. But now that, when she's doing it, it's not. And so there's a problem there. Right. And so I think like when you start to say, well, why do women feel maybe more like they struggle with it more, is because, well, oftentimes maybe the message they're getting is that what they're doing is not okay. Like who they are isn't okay. And so they feel like, well, maybe I don't fit in because now I've got to adhere to this larger societal kind of, I guess, a label or way of kind of behaving, and I've got to fit in this box, but I'm also operating in this larger kind of context. And the way that I operate in this box or remaining in this box doesn't really lend itself to me being successful in these other areas. So that I've moved up, but also I'm like the only woman in the room. So, I don't know that I really fit in here because I look around and no one else looks like me. And same is true for, people of color, right? Is that, being kind of not fitting into kind of the Westernness or whiteness. And so then you start to say, well, if I moved up into spaces where there aren't a lot of people of color, I start to question whether, I belong in this space, right? Like, so, if I'm in a majority white, institution and, I'm the only Black person there, then it starts to think of like, well, hold on, how did I get in this room? Because nobody else is in here. Are we not supposed to be in that space? And it goes both ways, where like people will look at you like, hey, what you doing in here kind of thing, even though like your skills and abilities are what really got you into the room, and that's why you belong. So like, don't self-select out. But you see it a lot in different professions, like, maybe men in nursing, women in tech, stuff like that, where it's like, okay, wait a second, traditionally this isn't the case. You're in here. Do I belong? And I think that's where the imposter syndrome or impostorism comes from.
And it's interesting. I'm glad you touched on that. As a woman, you're seen as aggressive, because I think it was quite a few years ago, probably about a good 15 years ago, that actually was said to me. A man said to me, Alison, as a Black woman, if you behave a certain way, you're going to be seen as aggressive, combative, argumentative. A white woman would be seen as passionate, enthusiastic, and assertive. And I looked at him and I thought, no, because I was not going to accept that. Guess what happened? I was working for a company, and I was the departmental coordinator / office manager / assistant to the head of the department.
Hmm.
And there was a woman, and she may have been a little bit mentally unstable because some of the
just a wee bit.
yeah, because when you think of some of their behaviors, when you look at it now, it's just like, wow, okay. And I remember there was one of the editors went and spoke to him, and she went off and she threw something at him, and it turned into this big thing. And so the head of the department kind of cowered away from it, and I just went in and was like, Psh, I'm not having this. And I went in and I dealt with the situation, calmed everybody down, and because I'm one of these people, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to go in there all guns blazing. Let me talk to each party, find out what happened. Because you know what? Your side, my side, truth. So, you know. And so I went to him and he told me what he said that caused the outburst. And he says, to be honest, I could have asked her for cheese. She would have reacted like that. I thought, oh, okay. Went to her, and she, like I said, she was just having a little bit of a meltdown, workload and all the rest of it. And unfortunately, it kind of came out on the young man. So I dealt with it and all the rest of it, no problem. So then the head says, oh my God, thank you so much for dealing with that. And I'm thinking, you know, that was way like several times over my pay grade, me dealing with that.
Right.
That's like, okay. But dealt with it, no problem. She thanked me. But then when it came to my review, she said to me, you know, you're a little bit scary. And I'm like, but I didn't throw nothing at nobody.
Right.
I'm like, hold on a second. Hold on. That girl she didn't even go to HR. Nothing happened.
Right.
I dealt with it, took care of it. Everybody, as you were, nothing to see here kind of thing, right? I'm scary. Like, but hold on. I took care of your stuff that you didn't want to take care of.
Right.
But I'm scary. And I looked at that and it was just like, I was told this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's annoying.
That you're going to be seen as aggressive when another will be seen as assertive, even if you throw something at somebody.
Yeah. That was okay, but you're the one who's scary.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you should say, and that's never left me that experience. I think because of that, thinking about it could be why women and women of color, when they go into a room, they kind of have to, what's the word? Almost dumb themselves down.
For sure. It's a management technique, right? So that you don't do what you can, you know, if that's even going to be successful, to kind of, you know, break these fears that other people will have, or these stereotypes or prejudice or, you know, implicit bias or whatnot. And it's like, you know, I don't know that you can really do that. And it's not really your issue, it's their issue. Right. And that's the thing, though, is that, you know, I think that imposter syndrome kind of lends itself to kind of manifesting as a result of having to navigate, you know, these different arenas and not be our true, authentic selves.
Interesting. So to wind up here, my last question to you is, how do you overcome imposter syndrome, and can you?
For sure. Yeah, I don't think it has to continue to be debilitating for you. For me, and I would say get into some therapy with someone who kind of knows how to treat and attend to it. Learn how to.
You got an opening for me, Stevon? I'm just like,
yeah. You know, you can find me, but I mean, it's also kind of, you know, becoming aware of your inner bully and the narrative that it's kind of telling you, right? And you for, you know, challenging or looking for that evidence to make sure that you aren't kind of listening to something that isn't really 100% accurate or true, right? That if you're saying something, then it should line up with some, you know, evidence to support that. If there's a miss there, then we've got to question why that might be. That either, you know, the evidence is true or wrong, or, you know, what the inner bully is telling you is probably inaccurate, is where I would tend to lean. And then kind of, you know, getting to a place of where you're doing some of that deeper work, if it's related to stuff that happened in childhood and you adopted this negative narrative about yourself, of maybe saying, hey, we don't need to hold on to that anymore. How can I let that go? How can I change my perception of self? And all that stuff can kind of, you know, come from awareness and insight into yourself. And a lot of that comes from being in therapy to do some of that stuff. So I give a bunch of worksheets to kind of assist and practice with that stuff, so that you can get better adept at being able to kind of combat your inner bully and change your perception of self.
That's interesting. Thank you, because it is one of those things where I was wondering, can you overcome it? How
Hmm.
do you overcome it? And then it just led me to think, so why do some people suffer from it and some people don't? You've just got
Right.
some people that are super. I heard this guy say, and I was just like, it blew me away. Somebody was mentioning something about his work and whatever. He goes, "Why? Is that because I'm a cocky MF?" I'm like, okay. No, sorry.
I
He
love
said
it.
this in work at the
Yeah.
front desk, and I was,
Yeah.
but yet I says maybe that's why you're at the top of your game because you don't have imposter syndrome. You just going
Mhm.
out there just doing your thing and boom, that's it. Whereas other people, they sit there literally biting their nails to the
Yep.
stub and to the quick, like, and it just made me think, what? Why some and not others? But it's the same thing. Why some people suffer from depression and other people don't? It's
Right.
the person.
Right.
I suppose it's the person listening to that inner bully, their inner
Hmm. Hmm.
dialogue, and what they take from it.
Yes. 100%.
Wow, thank you,
You're welcome.
thank you. I have some work to do, so thank you for that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Quite welcome. Glad I could be of assistance.
Yeah. So what's next for you, and where can people find you?
So the best way to kind of find me is either my website, www.stevonlewis.com, or on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active, kind of in social media wise. That's at Stevon Lewis MFT, Mary Frances Thomas. And I'm doing a bunch of stuff. I've got more podcasts I'm going to be taking for people. I'm working on an Imposter Syndrome workbook, and still kind of doing some therapy, but doing more speaking engagements, so dialing therapy, face-to-face therapy, or kind of telehealth that I'm doing now, dialing that back a bit, and engaging in more workshops and speaking engagements or whatnot.
Excellent. So if people wanted to sign up for the workshops or get the workbook, they can just go on your website and you'll just keep that posted, or you'll put the information on your social media platform.
Both. Yep. Yep.
And
Uh,
can you spell your website, please? I
uh,
just want to make sure people can get there.
yeah. It's STEVONLEWIS,
Thank
like Stephen, but ON.
you. Okay.
Yep.
StevonLewis.com.
Yep.
Excellent. Stevon, thank you. Thank you.
Thank
This has
you.
been great for me. This has been great. This actually has been a therapy session for me because I
Nice.
remembered things like that job that it's like, wow, I did that.
I'll invoice you then.
You have my email address. No, but seriously, thank you. I've learned so much, and
Thank
I'm
you.
so grateful for your time and your help, and just what you're doing to just help us be a better version of ourselves.
Thank you, Alison. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Stevon. Take care.
All right, have a good one.
You too. Thanks.
All
Bye.
right, bye.